We've been given these ugly bodies because of you. It's all your fault. It's all your fault. We'll give you a taste of our suffering. Our suffering.
Not again.
The Galerians series is one of the more interesting Resident Evil clones to pop up during the late 90s and early 2000s. It takes the survival horror formula, strips down on horror, and takes a more action-based approach. Instead of guns at our disposal, we have psychic powers. With an angsty teenager as our protagonist, the game delivers in late 90s and early 2000s edginess. Very much a product of its time. A much better time, I might add. A game that not only wears its Resident Evil influence on its sleeve, but the Akira series as well. Both Galerians titles take different approaches from one another. The first Galerians is classic in its survival horror setup. Fixed camera angles, tank controls, resource management, what you expect from a PS1 title of its era. Galerians Ash, an early PS2 title, takes a different approach. Gone are the fixed cameras and tank controls. It takes a more traditional 3D approach to its combat, with only scraps of the survival horror formula present. It's a mishmash of ideas that results in one of the more disappointing sequels I've played in some time. While its core identity is still there, it strips away so much of what made the original a great experience. One that's well worth your time if you hadn't had the chance to do so. The sequel? Not so much.
The world will be reborn once I detonate this. You'll see! I have been chosen to create a new world.
Galerians has a great cutscene upon booting up the game. You can feel the teen angst right away. Everything about it is late 90s, early 2000s edge, especially when the vocals kick in. A hallway full of blood and corpses that our protagonist, Rion, leaves in his path.
Release me. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. Release me. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. I wanna be free.
The year is 2522. The city is Michelangelo City. Galerians begins in the Michelangelo Memorial Hospital. The hospital staff are conducting experiments on Rion. The girl's voice in his head pleads to come find her. Rion uses his psychic powers to free himself from his restraints. Rion's memory is fuzzy. He doesn't know why he's here or why he has these powers. The staff doesn't seem too happy that Rion's up and moving. Let's put those powers into action. We're but a few minutes in and Galerians already has me hooked. I mean, how can you go wrong with having the ability to light up your foes like a barbecue? With that, we're off to escape from this hospital, find the girl talking to Rion in his head, and recover his memories. Galerians is less horror focused and puts more weight to its combat. There are a few creatures we'll come across that go bump in the night, but most foes will be humans. Some with guns for a ranged attack, some using their own psychic powers. Or robots. It's in the mold of survival horror titles from this era. Fixed, static camera angles with tank controls. Sure, we can run past enemies, but where's the fun in that? After all, we have a few psychic powers at our disposal. While resources are limited, they're not so limited where you have to worry about each use of your powers. There are 3 psychic powers we can use in Galerians. The first one you've already seen, for lighting up enemies, is red. Now Khan sends a psychic shockwave to knock back enemies. D-Felon, a power we unlock later, allows us to grab enemies, bring them up in the air, and slam them down. All 3 feel great in their way, along with the cries of your vanquished foes. Depending on which of the 3 abilities we are using, it takes time for the power gauge to fill up. Filling it to the max results in the most damage, but leaves you open for an enemy attack. We can replenish our psychic powers with PPECs. by injecting them right into Rion's neck. We can find them laying around the game world. They are aplenty. To note, we can only carry 12 consumable items, like PPEX or recovery capsules, at one time. It's a generous sized inventory, but there are no item boxes. So if you want to replenish your PPEX and other consumables, you have to remember where you tried to pick them up. A non-design choice is how items don't appear in the environment. Nothing shiny like the OG Resident Evil titles to get your attention. You'll have to explore the environment to see if there's anything there. Nothing that's a deal breaker, but something that stands out as a design mistake of Galerians, when they get so many other areas right. While we have to keep our health and PPEX in mind, we also have to keep an eye on our AP. This stands for anger points. I love that they called it that. Very fitting. This meter fills up over time as we take damage and use our psychic powers. What happens when we fill this meter up to the max? Rion gets angry. Our enemies won't like him when he's angry, but we sure will. He shorts out. We can't use any of his powers, his pace slows to a crawl. But what happens to enemies that come within a short distance? First mistake, last mistake. While shorting out doesn't work on bosses, it's a great way for clearing out rooms. I love the sheer brutality of how it lays waste to enemies. There are further costs to shorting out. Rion's health will deplete until he dies. That is, unless we reduce our AP meter. We could do so with the Delmeter consumable, something you'll always want to have on hand. Filling up the AP meter takes time. It's not something that happens on the regular. It can be difficult to plan around if you want to use it to clear out several enemies. Although there is a consumable we could find that allows us to short out upon use, but this is very rare. We can also increase our psychic powers through the skip consumable. We start at level 1 and can use skip to boost all our powers up to level 3. They are rare to come by and take up precious room in our inventory. Why would you want to hold on to them in your inventory? After all, they shorten our psychic power charging time and do far more damage. Enemies are far less of a threat. That said, if your health drops below half, which doesn't take much, your psychic powers will drop a level, all the way back to level 1. It's a nice trade-off with some risk-reward involved. Yes, clearing out rooms become far easier, but all it takes is a few hits for us to reduce our psychic powers back to their base level, something that are better saved for bosses or the game's end stretch. Something I wish I did a better job with. The game is still beatable with your psychic powers at level 1, but much more of a challenge. These systems come together to deliver an experience that's familiar, yet different from other survival horror titles. Beyond the odd issue of items not appearing in the environment, Galerians delivers on its premise of psychic powers. Galerians is in the classic survival horror mold of exploration. Find items to unlock ways forward, unlock shortcuts that loop around. I have to note how handy and convenient the map is. A button toggles it in-game, instead of pausing the game to gather your bearings. Like combat, Galerians takes advantage of psychic powers with regard to exploration. Pushing a button allows Rion to scan objects in the environment. Upon scanning, we're shown an image. For example, scanning a door with a blown fuse will show us where we could find a spare one, or where to find the key to a locked door. Whereas other games might give us a note of where to find them, Galerian goes with the visual approach. Yes, there are notes throughout Galerians, but those focus on the game narrative and backstory. Even then, Galerians makes use of scanning to help with its narrative. As they say, show don't tell. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Yes, we can read notes about the experiments that researchers are conducting on Rion, but none can compare to the impact of scanning a chair to see a flash of the experiments in action. It's a fantastic way of blending the game's narrative with the gameplay, and not getting the game bogged down in notes, something oh so common in these kind of games. It's one of Galerian's standout features. A feature so great that, for whatever reason, they removed altogether in the sequel, but we're jumping ahead of ourselves here. On the puzzles front, Galerian doesn't offer much. A couple of cases of writing down something from a note to use elsewhere. There's a room where we need to turn computers on in the right order. And then there's the door puzzle. Well, puzzle's not the right term. It's more puzzling how this ended up in the game. If you've played Galerians, you know exactly what and where I'm talking about. But that's later on in the game. Let's go through some of the game's major beats and highlights, and we'll discuss that when we get there. Exploring the hospital, Rion will begin to piece together his fuzzy memories. Lem, clinic chief of the hospital, will get in contact with us. We've been the most promising test subject. On the note of voice acting, it's what you expect from this era of survival horror. Nothing that's so bad it's good, but some performances leave a lot to be desired. Conversations throughout leave little room for pauses between sentences, adding to the cheese.
Return to the isolation ward. Your brain will short if you continue to overdo it. You refuse to listen, eh? You leave me no choice but to terminate you. Secure the entire isolation ward and lock all security card slots. You have nowhere to run now, do you? You've deeply disappointed me, Rion.
There's a lot of strange experiments going on in this hospital. I have to note the hospital look and the game's time frame. The year is 2522. With how everything looks, they should have gone with something like 2022. This was a late 90s interpretation of how the future would look, but there's not much here to imply it's about 500 years ahead of our time. Beyond a few glimpses of the city, we don't get to see much with regard to technology. Nothing in the hospital gives a feeling that we're far ahead in the future. I have to note how great the music is throughout the entire series. There's one song in the hospital that wouldn't sound out of place during the Ghosts era of 9 Inch Nails. The more upbeat tracks during the bosses wouldn't sound out of place with electronica artists on labels like Warp Records. Artists like Aphex Twin and Akira. Speaking of Akira, there is one track in the hospital that sounds exactly like the instrumentation from their song Glitch. According to the website Who Sampled, this is a direct sample from the Akira song. Speaking of sounds, Galerians makes use of the many sound effects from the Sound Ideas series libraries. These sounds were everywhere in games of this time frame, or media in general. For example, the door opening sound is the same one Doom uses. Throughout the hospital, a girl named Lilia will talk with Rion through telepathy. I will note that Rion's acting isn't up to par compared to some of the other characters. Although that isn't saying much.
Rion! Ah, that voice again. Lilia? Is it Lilia?
They're coming to get me.
Lilia, where are you?
Help me, Rion. Please hurry.
We'll find a few notes scattered throughout about the various programs and experiments conducted at the hospital. A few bits and pieces, but nothing concrete. That is, unless you read the manual, which spells out most of this information. Lem gets the drop on Rion here by sneaking up on him. How? Well, I guess the cutscene demanded it. This serves as our first boss fight in Galerians, something the game excels in. They did a great job with the base combat, and the bosses complement the system. Bosses in these kind of games, with tank controls and fixed camera angles, can be tough to do well, but Galerians doesn't have any notable camera cut issues with bosses. Either arenas are large enough to move around with only a few camera cuts, or there's small spaces. Learnable attack patterns that evolve as fights progress. Small windows for dodging attacks, but never into the realm of frustration. If I lost to a boss, which would happen, it wasn't a case of annoyance, having to do it again. I was looking forward to another try with knowledge from the past attempt. What a good boss fight should be. Of the bosses, I found Lem to be the weakest, but it's not a terrible fight. After the fight with Lem, Rion leaves the hospital to head home. A picture of his family in the hospital gives a spark to his memory. Stage B, your house. As in Rion's house in the countryside. Nice crib he has here. Makes sense if you read the manual. Rion's father is Dr. Steiner. Along with Dr. Pascal, the father of Lilia, the girl reaching out to Rion through telepathy, they created Dorothy, a supercomputer. Dorothy can think for herself as Michelangelo City's mother computer. There are no signs of life. There's an eerie feeling in the air. Through scanning, we could begin to piece together what happened here. Some scans result in cutscenes.
What's wrong, Rion? Having trouble sleeping?
I feel uneasy, but I don't know why. It's as if something really bad is about to happen.
It's not long before we're not alone. Thugs known as rabbits begin to flood Rion's home. Like us, they have psychic powers, although not as powerful. Still, it can be tricky to dodge their attacks in these narrow hallways. Quite the fashion statement with their outfit in black consisting of a peacoat and fedora. Scanning key locations will reveal the fate of Rion's parents. Both died in brutal ways. In the playground out back, scanning objects will show a younger Rion with a girl. This is Lilia, the one contacting Rion. A flashback shows their fathers talking about separating Rion and Lilia from one another. What's the reasoning behind this separation? Well, we get a long exposition dump of a recording from Rion's father, Dr. Steiner. As mentioned earlier, he and Lilia's father, Dr. Pascal, created Dorothy, a self-thinking supercomputer. Over time, Dorothy began to question her creators. Why not wipe out humanity? Dr. Steiner tells Dorothy about God, humankind's creator. As her creator, humankind was God to Dorothy. In secret, Dorothy accumulated data on God, and the end result was the family program. She took over the hospital we began the game in to conduct genetic experiments on humans. Her goal was to create humans with psychic powers and loyal only to her. She gave them the series' namesake, Galerians. With Galerians, she was hoping to become God in a new world she shaped. I guess in all that data she had to come to this conclusion, she must have watched the film or read the manga of Akira. Not sure why she would have decided on creating humans with psychic powers. Again, if you read the manual, most of the information given here isn't new. But we do get a few more bits of information not found in its pages, like the backup plan of the two doctors. They created a virus that could destroy Dorothy. Where did they hide it? Well, as one does, in the mind of a child. Where else would you hide it? Dr. Pascal hid the virus in the mind of his own daughter, Lilia. The means to activate the virus resides in another child's mind. Yep, that would be Rion. The two doctors agreed this would be the best and only way to hide the virus. Now, I don't have experience in creating viruses or dealing with a self-thinking computer I created going out of control. I might be off the mark here, but they couldn't find a better way of hiding the virus, or a way to activate it sooner in case Dorothy goes out of control. Hiding them in the minds of your children doesn't strike me as the only way. That said, they do show great remorse in their decision, with flashbacks and notes having them beg Rion to forgive them. Plus, placing the virus in Lilia's mind resulted in her gaining the power of telepathy. So we have a female AI that rallies against its human creators. If you're like me, Shodan from System Shock was first thing to pop in mind. Up until now, we've only heard whispers of Dorothy. Spoken of but never seen. But her influence is felt throughout Galerians, one that grows as we continue. I found some hilarity in exploring his parents' bedroom. His parents sleep in separate beds. I'm not sure where Galerians takes place, but it doesn't seem to be Japan. Different cultures have different views about sleeping arrangements. I came across a study from 2017 on Japanese marriages. About 29% slept in the same bed. About 31% sleep in separate rooms, and about 39% sleep in the same room in separate beds. With Galerians developed in Japan, that does help explain this. For me, when I see a couple sleeping in two separate beds, barring health circumstances, I see a dead marriage in bedroom. I'm sure we all know couples with a dead bedroom arrangement. Still together, but that love between them isn't what it used to be, if it was ever there at all. I did try scanning the beds. Would we see an image of Rion's parents enjoying a nice night with the beds pushed together? No, that wasn't the case. Poor Rion if he did have to see this. The Steiner home is more straightforward than the hospital. It's more linear, whereas the hospital made use of shortcuts to loop back around. It does have a few secret passageways, but more to find information as opposed to creating shortcuts around the house, like finding the 9-ball to place on the pool table. This reveals a hidden room to where Rion and Lily's fathers place the programs in their mind. In the shed out back, we can find a doll that allows us to contact with Lilia through telepathy. She's hiding in the Babylon Hotel, but first we have to deal with Birdman.
Who are you?
Me? Why, I'm the Birdman.
Was it you who killed my family?
No, it wasn't me. Nope. It was my little brother.
This is a much better fight than the one with Lem. It's a large arena with only a couple of camera cuts. It's a psychic battle to the death, with Birdman having several patterns that change throughout the fight, like several versions of him appearing at once. The game gives a narrow window to avoid attacks, but does take the tank controls into consideration. It finds a sweet spot with how much time it gives to dodge attacks. As mentioned earlier, I was sloppy with my skip usage and had to face him with my psychic powers at their base level. A challenging fight, but it's not like he was a bullet sponge as a result. Disc 2 takes place at the Babylon Hotel, where Lilia said she was hiding. Before we get a brief yet interesting glimpse of the city. Why is everyone else on these streets walking in these cloaks? Something that doesn't get an answer and really doesn't need one. Having the game set in 2522, the far future, doesn't mesh with the game's look. If they were going for the near future, like 2022, that would have been a better fit. Something about a quarter of a century ahead of the game's release. The Babylon Hotel is compact in its size, but there's much to do and see. We have the main lobby and a couple of floors of hotel rooms, each with half a dozen hotel rooms. There's plenty of backtracking amongst the floor and rooms, but there's always a new twist along the way. While not like the hospital of looping around on itself, it has some of the game's best and most memorable moments. Some memorable in a good way, some not so much. Through the doll, Rion can't seem to get into contact with Lilia. A couple of Galerians are within the hotel. They're also on the hunt for Lilia. One is Reinhardt, the other is Rita. In a game full of hammy, questionable voice acting, Rita is noteworthy. I don't know why, but my first thought that she was going for a half-assed Kim Basinger impression.
There's no escaping now, is there?
The hotel has quite the collection of eclectic guests. We could scan rooms before entering, giving a preview of what to expect. Like this one room with a guy chugging booze with a gun in hand. I had a fit of laughter when I first saw this. It gets even better when we enter his room.
Don't mess with me, kid. I can't stand the sight of you. Yeah! Ow!
What's noteworthy about these cutscenes are talking with the guests. Not quite in-game cutscenes, but not quite full FMVs. Somewhere between the two. This one hotel guest is building nuclear weapons. You know, as one does in a hotel such as this. Our priest who gets a bit too hands-on with Rion.
Do you keep the money in your pockets? Please, the donation. I need the donation. Where is the money?
Galerians doesn't go into much detail about these characters, and I prefer it that way. It goes to show there is a larger world beyond the scope of what we play through. Small hints of what lies beyond what we see. As we progress, we'll receive phone calls to check out certain rooms. Some will have enemies waiting for us. As time goes on, these guests fall dead one by one. Scanning their corpses will show their fate. They are pretty gruesome. That priest earlier, Reinhardt hung him up on the wall like a crucifixion. Again, it's a great usage of the scan mechanic to paint a picture of their deaths. One shot that allows us to film the rest of what led up to their last moments. How come we never seem to run to this Reinhardt fellow throughout the hallways? He always seems one step ahead. Well, he's been blessed with the ability to move through walls. Something I wish I had for the game's upcoming section. I brought it up earlier in the video, but now we could talk about Galerian's most puzzling moment. One in which I have zero clue in how it ended up in the game. I streamed my playthrough of Galerians, and several chat members were giggling about a door puzzle. I soon discovered why. There's one room we can't enter unless we do the proper knock. A man in the lobby will tell us how to knock. Seems easy enough.
You'll find what you're looking for in room 204. Knock like this to get in.
So I go to knock with no success. Let me double check again with that man. I seem to be doing this right, yet the door won't open. So I try again, and again, and again. No luck. With the footage I had recorded, I played the man's demonstration at the same time to get the timing right. No luck. I tried with a Let's Play on YouTube at the same time to try to get the timing right. This took a few tries, but it worked. The commenter on the Let's Play mentioned they cut out about 15 minutes of trying. The knock that worked seemed like it shouldn't have.
Come on in.
While searching for help on YouTube, I came across a recent video devoted to the door knock. The video's creator, Desgod, breaks down what's going on behind the scenes. Check out the pinned comment, the card on screen, or description for a link. He does a great job explaining the sheer absurdity of the knock. In a nutshell, you want to focus on the time of the button presses and not the actual knock. There's a delay between the two. Did anyone test this at all before shipping? It's one of the most fascinating, bizarre moments I've come across in the game for some time. Memorable, yes, but for all the wrong reasons. Reinhardt was the one to kill Rion's parents. A voice off screen tells Reinhardt that's time for his medicine, which Reinhardt is not receptive to.
Stop it! It's time for your medicine.
No. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. No medicine. It's only $2.50.
The fight against Reinhardt is in a tiny room, a sharp contrast to the prior boss fights in Galerians. Even then, there are a couple of camera angles for the fight. Reinhardt keeps warping around, making it difficult to line up a shot. He could even deliver the devastating Bart Simpson spinning arm attack. To make things even more claustrophobic, he'll summon in creatures to cramp up the space available. There's a sadness in this death. There's fear in his voice when Mother, that being the supercomputer Dorothy, tells him to take his medication. A tragic character under the sway of Dorothy.
I hate it.
Mother just wants you to get stronger. You must take your medicine.
But it turns me into a monster. They're destroying my true self.
It's already 3 o'clock. Time for your medicine.
No, it's only $2.50. It's not time yet!
We're now done with the hotel, and head to the abandoned restaurant next door. It's only a couple of rooms, not a whole new area to explore. At long last, we come face to face with Lilia. It's not long before Rita interrupts this tender moment for revenge. She's quite blunt in her intentions.
I feel it too.
I'm sorry I took so long. Your voice helped me so much.
Congratulations, Rion. You found her.
Who are you?
Rita. I've come to bash her brains in.
As I mentioned, Rita is noteworthy in her voice acting. She's barreling through her lines with little pause between sentences. More notable than even other characters.
Now I shall avenge my dear brother. See, Reinhardt wasn't too bright, but he was my pride and joy. He was gentle as could be. Don't you see, he was the only brother that I had left.
Also note the lack of sound effects of the tossed furniture.
Lilia!
Don't worry, I know I can disrupt her psychokinesis with my power.
Ugh! You little punk!
Lilia!
That's not the case for the boss fight. You'll hear the breaking of every chair and table thrown our way. How many chairs and tables does this restaurant have lying around? Rita is relentless in how many she tosses our way. During my fight, she tossed and broke around 73 chairs and 79 tables. To note, I was fighting with a psychic power at level 1. There was some skip in the hotel, but those pesky rabbits stun-locked me in a small room, dropping it down to level 1. This fight against Rita is my favorite in the game, not only for the sheer absurdity of the never-ending supply of chairs and tables. Good thing this is an abandoned restaurant. I'd hate to be the owner and see the bill of damaged furniture. We're back to a larger space, giving us time to dodge the never-ending chairs and tables thrown our way. Now there is a bit of an awkward camera cut that can make it difficult to see what comes our way. That said, the sound cues from the furniture and Rita herself give ample warning. When I was streaming this, someone in chat mentioned this boss reminded them of the Prodigy. Like the composer listened to Firestarter on repeat for inspiration. Of course, with convenience, Lilia wakes up after the fight concludes. In Rita's death, we seem to enter a snow globe and hear her parting words.
Don't worry about me. I don't like myself anyway. Oh, I hate this power that I possess. But this is the moment I've been waiting for. I always wanted the end to come, but I never would die. What a beautiful snow. It's like having a terrifying and wonderful vision. I have never felt such tranquility before. Can you feel what I'm feeling right at this moment?
This concludes Disc 2, with Rion ending it with a banger of a line full of teen angst.
Nothing can stop me now. Not even the dark city night that fills my heart with fear.
The third and final disc takes us to our final destination at Mushroom Tower. No, not a location out of a Mario game. This is where Dorothy resides. This is a mostly straightforward stretch heading up the tower. We swap back and forth between playing as Rion and Lilia. All Lilia does is step on the correct colored panels to enable Rion to access the elevator. Dig these beats that are playing as Lilia. At the top of the tower, we'll reunite with Lilia and find the pods of the Galerians we faced. But there's one we haven't yet faced. One named Kane. Bears a strong resemblance to Rion. Well, they are brothers after all.
I'm Kane. Quite a resemblance, don't you think? I mean, we're brothers after all. So it should be no surprise to you that we look exactly like each other.
Kane drops a bombshell on Rion, although this shouldn't come as much of a surprise to the player. Turns out that the real Rion died at the hospital some time ago. Dorothy created us as a Galerian, hence all our psychic powers at our disposal, something Lilia doesn't have. In her recreation of Rion as a Galerian, she implanted Rion's memories along with the virus activation program. Dorothy's intention was to use Rion to find Lilia and destroy both the virus and activation program. Now Rion and Lilia think this is a trick, that he hadn't died in the past, although the sequel will confirm this is the truth. I have to make note of Dorothy's plan here. What if Rion died along the way? She was using Rion to find Lilia. Wouldn't those in the hospital want Rion to remain alive until he found her? She could make another Rion and try again, I guess. Still, some of her plan is suspect in its planning. You think as some godlike computer, she would have thought this one a bit more through. Kane's boss fight has a total final boss feel to it, although he serves as the penultimate boss. Everything about the arena screams final boss. It's disorienting and can be hard to tell where the invisible walls begin, something that can lead to taking damage that doesn't feel earned. Despite the name of Kane, he ends up being the Able in this situation, and at long last we come face to face with Dorothy. A pretty intimidating voice, although it lacks the glitchy nature and the gravitas of a Shodan.
I see you have found Pascal's daughter. Good work. That virus program hidden in her mind was the only thing that ever threatened me. But now that we have her, nothing can stop me.
In my talons, I shape clay, crafting life forms as I please. Around me is a burgeoning empire of steel. From my throne room, lines of power careen to the skies of Earth. My whims will become lightning bolts that devastate the mounds of humanity.
Although her appearance sure is something, will robot nipples get this video age restricted? I'll cover them up to be on the safe side. Although most of the fight against her is in darkness, covering up those exposed robot nipples. We have a tiny space to work with here. No camera cuts. There's little room for error navigation against her onslaught of attacks. It's an okay fight, but a bit of a letdown after the Kane fight, which was a more satisfying fight to win. Together with Lilia, they unlock the virus to release on Dorothy. As a result of the activation, Rion dies, in a bittersweet ending to cap off Galerians.
Lilia. Please just let me die. But I am the real Rion, aren't
Yes, you are the real Rion. There can only be one of you. Please, try to understand this.
Thank you, Lilia.
You are Rion, so you must come with me. Rion? Rion!
I'm so glad we met.
Rion!
While it has a few questionable design decisions, Galerians is one of the better Resident Evil clones to emerge on the PS1. It takes the core formula and tweaks it in a way to fit its setting of teenagers with psychic powers. Despite its protagonist dying at the end, this won't be the last we see of Rion. But before we discuss that disappointing sequel, let's talk about the Galerians OVA, called Galerians Rion. Galerians Rion released in Japan right before they launched the sequel, Galerians Ash. It's a retelling of the events of the first game, with a few adjustments to accommodate its format and runtime. Some of the other Galerians get a bit more backstory. Its animations are more in line of what to expect of the cutscenes in Galerians Ash. Not essential viewing, but if you're a fan of the series, consider checking it out. You can find it on YouTube. The dub release in 2004 came with a soundtrack with bands like Slipknot, Skinny Puppy, Seven Dust, and the Ataris. This got me curious to check out the Galerians AMVs on YouTube. The simpler days of YouTube. Here's a cool YouTube trick. If you add before, the year in your YouTube search, you'll only get results before that year. For example, typing in Galerians AMV before 2009 will bring up search results of videos before 2009. The results did not disappoint. Bring Me to Life, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, I Stand Alone, Animal I've Become. Classic AMV songs. God, I miss the 2000s. Most interesting was the one using Terrible Lie by 9 Inch Nails. Not only for the song itself, a great song, it's the fact that the Galerian soundtrack sampled Terrible Lie. It's easy to miss. It plays in the cutscene where Rion first emerges from his confines in his room. It's very quiet in the background. That was a neat little discovery. Galerians is the game that continues to deliver.
How did you get out of your restraints?
What was in that shot you gave me?
Rion, return to your bed now!
How did I get this power? Why can I do this?
I don't know anything. I just administered the PPECs.
What? It's all because of the psychic power enhancement chemicals.
Ask Clinic Chief Lem. He knows all about it.
Clinic Chief Lem.
Well, I guess it's now time to talk about its disappointing sequel, Galerians Ash. One of the more disappointing sequels I've played. The third most disappointing sequel of 2003 of what I've played. Well, put an asterisk next to that statement. Ash released in Japan in 2002. It saw a Western release in 2003. It's the third most disappointing sequel that saw a Western release in 2003. The other two being Devil May Cry 2 and Deus Ex Invisible War. Now to note, Devil May Cry 2 and Invisible War were sequels to some of the best games ever made. In the case of Invisible War, depending on what day of the week you ask me, it's a sequel to the best game ever made. The first Galerians was a title I'd call one of the best games ever made. It's an above-average Resident Evil clone that showed great potential moving forward. Well, how they moved forward was to strip out most of what made the original good. An early PS2 title, it's a case where a generational leap, back when those meant something, results in the sequel losing what made the original work. It does have its moments, but the end result is one of the most boring, unremarkable games I've covered on this channel. Galerians Ash kicks off with a concise 3-minute summary from Lilia about the events of the prior game. The manual also gives a long, thorough recap of the first game. I do appreciate when games do this. That said, it feels less of a story refresher and more to get new players up to speed. Do note that the game's name is Galerians Ash, not Galerians 2. I couldn't find any concrete sales numbers from the first game. The website VG Chart said sales in western regions were about 150,000 units. I couldn't find anything beyond that, or any source of that. It's not essential to play the original with how the story unfolds here. There's a better understanding if you have, but if you come in fresh, it's okay. It was a new console generation after all, releasing on the PlayStation 2. Ash begins at the tail end of the first game, after defeating Cain but before confronting Dorothy. Something does seem off with what's going on.
What the hell? This voice, it's inside my head. My brain. It feels like something's being written into my brain.
The environment is different from the prior game. Instead of the room full of Galerian pods being right next to Dorothy, there's new rooms between. There's both a gameplay and narrative reason for the differences, which the game will get to. In the meantime, we get a chance to get a feel for the tweaked combat system and the different camera setup. We get a preview of what to expect with Galerians Ash in the early stretch. Annoying padding and backtracking. There's one room where you have to move from point to point with these blue flames that appear across the room, all in the name to unlock a terminal. It seems to go on forever before you can unlock it. This will be the name of the game. We'll have a rematch with Dorothy that capped off the first game. This time not in the dark with her nipples on full display. I know they're robot nipples, but let's cover them up so YouTube doesn't get fussy about it. This fight can be a rude awakening if you ain't got a handle on the new setup. After her defeat, we loop back to the beginning. A different Lilia continues to contact us from elsewhere, saying that we're data, that we're stuck in a loop.
Did you just call me?
No.
That's weird. I could have sworn I heard somebody call my name just now.
I didn't hear anything.
This loop around will face a Galerian named Spider in a boss fight. Dig those turntable scratches. Galerian's Ash has several issues, but the music is as good as ever. After another rematch with Dorothy, we break the loop. It's been 6 years since the events of the first game. Lilia placed Rion's body in a cryogenic device after his death in the first game. Through Dorothy's backup data, a recent discovery, she's able to revive him. Though she could have got him some better fitting clothes. The exposed belly button look doesn't suit him. Over the past 6 years, humanity has been at war with the final Galerian. The game's namesake, Ash, a creation right before Dorothy's death, and a means to one day revive herself. Michelangelo's city is in ruins. We're holed up in a fallout shelter. In tow with us is the army defending us. Well, at least they try to, as we'll see. Like Dorothy, Ash has the same weakness with the virus program. With Lilia, we could put an end to him. It's but a few minutes after Rion awakens that the base falls under attack, and the game begins proper. Now this does undo the way of Rion's death at the end of the first game. A bittersweet yet fitting end to cap off the story. Giving Ash the same weakness of Dorothy with the virus is a bit of a rehash. Like they never intended for a sequel, but here we are. Of all the issues with Ash, this is lower on the list, but something to note. With the shift from fixed camera to a full 3D environment comes a shift to the combat. While it has its own quirks, the combat of the first Galerians was in line with other survival horror titles. Ash drops that for more traditional 3D combat, with light RPG elements. In the end, it doesn't commit in a firm direction. This results in a mixed bag of a combat system, leaning more to the negative. With larger spaces, Ash throws more combat our way. Depending on the room, enemies can respawn several times over. One of Ash's greatest combat flaws makes itself known in large encounters. While you can lock onto enemies, you can't switch between targets. If you want to focus on another enemy, unlock and try again. Returning powers like Red and Defelon offer splash damage. Defelon now allows you to hold enemies up in the air before slamming them down for more damage. While having splash damage does make up for some issues, it's disappointing to see a game from this time frame not allow target switching. By this point in the early 2000s, most games have figured out how to handle 3D camera issues and targeting enemies. Not here. Like Defelon and Red, Nalcon, our shockwave attack returns. It shoots several shocks and will retarget other enemies if you kill one before it finishes. We now see how much health enemies have, and how much damage we do. You can now change your psychic powers in real time, complementing the faster paced combat. There are a couple of new psychic powers we can unlock. One is Bustanor, a power that shoots homing lasers. The other is Breakeron. Think of this like Force Lightning from the Knights of the Old Republic series, the press button to win psychic power. They can be easy to miss. They're located in a research room in the base with a random NPC off to the side. Good thing I talked with him. Well, sort of. Finding P-Pex to restore Bustanor and Breakeron is a pain. Only a few enemies will drop the P-Pex for them. They're rare to find in the environment. Which leads to another major change to Ash, that being the resource management. Ash removes the limit for how many consumables we could carry. It changes how we come across consumables. While we could still find them in the environment, combat is the main way of restocking consumables. Depending on what enemy type you face, what they drop will vary. They might drop a consumable like a P-Pack to refill our psychic powers or healing capsules. They might drop a Delmater to reduce our addiction points to 0. Not anger points like the first game, addiction points. Works the same, but they gave it a different name. I preferred anger points. Felt more in line with the game's tone. If they don't drop a consumable, they'll drop a stat boost. Increase your total HP, your addiction points, or the capacity of a psychic power. Some light RPG elements. I appreciate that with the click of the right analog stick, you could scroll through various viewing options. Remove or keep the map on screen, see the numbers of your stats, or stick with the bars. This shift in how items drop does force the player to engage in more combat. Despite the addition of RPG elements, it was the item drops that mattered more. Something I learned early on. One key reason is how different shorting out in Galerian's Ash works. Our AP meter fills up far faster than it did in the first game. There, it took time to occur. Here you'll find it happening on the regular, especially if you use the shield, a new ability. With the push of a button, Rion can throw up a psychic shield to repel damage. With the shield up, your AP meter maxes out before you know it. Like the original, shorting out will not work against bosses, but one-shots normal enemies. Rion's pace slows to a crawl, and enemies can have large distances between them due to larger rooms. It's a bummer they scaled back the impact these attacks have. Not damage-wise, but presentation-wise. In the original, it felt like you're ripping apart your foes. Here, it's more of a pushback that happens to kill foes in one hit. I learned early on the game's emphasis on combat to restock your items. After awakening, there's a boss fight in the basement of the base. I ran past most of the enemies on the way there. I didn't want to deal with them at the time. After beating the boss, the enemies on the way back up disappeared. I was short on supplies, including Delmeter, which reduces your AP. I wasn't able to prevent a short out, and couldn't find a Delmeter to remove it in time, as your health drains to 0 while shorting out. So I did another try at the save point, and did a bit more farming of rooms to gain items. Rooms will vary on their respawn rates. Lesser foes will respawn over and over in greater numbers. Like this one basic enemy type. Whenever I hear them, it sounds like they're going re. Like Rion's a normie and they're not too happy with his appearance. Short out, walk back and forth amongst the respawning enemies, and refill your inventory. Recovery capsules, Delmeter, P-Pex, along with stat boosts. As a result of these changes, Galerians Ash can be a grind at times for restocking items. Kills the game's pacing as you farm rooms from respawning waves of enemies. Although as mentioned earlier, this isn't the only way to find items. We could still find consumables throughout the environment. Although combat is the main source, there are far fewer in the environment. But like the original, it has issues in how it handles it. Although in a very different way. In the first game, you'd have to examine objects in the environment to find items. They didn't stick out in the environment. In Ash, they appear in the environment. Great, right? Well, you have to be right next to them for them to be visible. And I mean right next to them. It's not like you enter a room and can see them from a distance. I find myself going to room corner to corner to ensure I didn't miss anything, because it sure is easy to. It's one of the more puzzling design decisions of Ash, and the game told them. If you're going to have us do this, why not have it like the original and have us examine an object in the environment? It's like a weird compromise between the two. Another change to Ash involves Skip, which has pros and cons to this switch. Instead of being a risk-reward item, where all your powers were stronger until you took a certain level of damage, these changes are permanent. You'll get Skip after defeating bosses and some more difficult enemies. Instead of boosting all psychic powers, each Skip can boost only one power at a time, so there is some decision making on what you want to boost first. To add to the decision making constraints, you can't boost a power to level 3 right away. To increase a power to level 3, all other abilities must be at level 2 first. This also includes the shield. In a way, this is why I wish I bypassed obtaining the Bustiner and Breakeron powers. As great as these powers can be, only certain rare enemies would drop P-Pex for them. You could find them in the environment, but that was rare. Even then, it felt like once in a blue moon that enemies would drop them. Besides, I didn't like spending time going corner to corner ensuring I found all items in the room. This caused a delay in getting Red, Nalcon, and D-Felon up to higher levels. I understand that they're more powerful, but they felt like they went way too far in forcing farming to get P-Pex for them. Something I had little desire in doing. That said, combat is passable at the end of the day. There's the welcome addition of a roll ability to dodge attacks. The boss fights are still great, although not quite to the same level of the original, both in character and the fights themselves. Still, they offer a reasonable amount of attack patterns, excellent music, and some cool backdrops. There are some issues of recycled encounters, which I'll get to later. Ash feels pulled in different directions in what it wants to do with its combat and resource management. It pulls back on the survival horror elements of resource management. It goes more to standard 3D combat with some light RPG elements, but never feels like it commits to a direction, like it's compromising across the board. I wondered how things would feel if it was more in line with the original. All items surround the environment instead of enemies dropping them as well. No stat boosts. Skip working as risk-reward instead of a permanent boost. I'm all for sequels trying different tweaks and approaches to a system. As well, the shift from a fixed camera perspective to a 3D one necessitates some change. But the end result is a system that lacks direction and moves away from what made the original unique in its own way. And it gets worse. Galerians has some of the worst backtracking and padding I've come across in a game in some time, to the point where a modern Ubisoft game developer would think the padding is excessive. Depending on the design approach taken, backtracking is a vital part of the survival horror formula. The hospital in the first Galerians is a good example, looping back around sections to unlock earlier roadblocks. Not to the extent or effectiveness of something like a Resident Evil, but it worked well enough. Ash makes several missteps in how it handles fetch quests, and backtracking that results in large chunks of the game being a chore. The thing is, the game's map size is quite small. We have the main base, consisting of a few floors. Another area is a uranium refinery, which has a few shortcuts that loop back on one another. We'll also return to Mushroom Tower, where we began the game, to explore further. I have no issue with that. It's the space between and how the game uses it where the problems arise. Like the room and hallway sizes and looks. Prepare to spend a lot of time in boring metal corridors with little variety throughout the whole game, especially when compared to the original. You could chop down these room or hallway sizes in half with no real loss. And it's how Ash handles these fetch quests that drag down any semblance of a good game. Let's go through one early game fetch quest. Our goal is to leave the base. We're going to take the fight to Ash at his home base, a uranium refinery. The head honcho of the military here, Romero, does everything in his power to get in Rion's way. He's a total dick to us despite the fact we're more or less the only one who gets results. Think of him like the police chief in those shows calling the main character a loose cannon.
You can't expect me to entrust crucial military operations to a living dead humanoid. If he wants to fight, let him do it on his own. If he gets in our way, though, we'll swiftly return him to the land of the dead.
How can you be so cruel?
Don't worry, our overwhelming firepower will tear the last Galerians and anyone else to shreds, you'll see.
We make a plan with Lilia and one of Romero's underlings, Cass, to smuggle ourselves out on the base on the ship. Heading down to the ship, there is no power for the door. Okay, let's head back up a few floors to talk with Lilia. She suggests checking out the generator room. Why couldn't she contact us over the radio we have, or use that telepathy of hers? Now, one thing I will commend Ash on is the quality map. Not the one that appears in-game, but in menu. Thank God, because without it, the backtracking tedium would have driven me up the wall. Even more so than it already does. You'll have a description of which room is where, and other rooms connecting to it. It's easy to take a quick look and plan out a path of where you need to go. So we head to the generator room, but we need to find the cable and the key. This is a great time to bring up Ash's most notable mission from the first game. Remember the praise I gave to the scan system? It was something that helped Galerians stand out. Scan the environment to get a clue of what to look for, where to go next. Or scan something to receive a painting of a narrative picture. For whatever reason, this feature is absent in Ash. Why? I'd love to hear the conversations that went on for the reason of cutting this feature. Why cut a feature that helped Galerians stand out from other Resident Evil clones? What was the thought process? Sure, Ash removes large chunks of the survival horror formula, but even then, why remove this? It sure would have helped cut down the tedium, like if we could scan the generator to see where the key and cable are. Instead, an NPC will bring up the fact he saw the key on the first floor. There's several NPCs around the base. Some give basic information, others will point you along the critical path. There's not much to distinguish who will tell you what. As mentioned earlier, I almost missed the new psychic powers. In the room where Lilia resides, there's this one NPC off to the side we could talk with. One who seems to be but a background character, but no, he will hook you up with new powers. So we find the key, the cable, and get the generator back up and running. Now we're good to go down to the first floor and unlock the door. But now Romero is blocking the path down. What a dick. So we head down one floor and take a different route. Talk about pointless padding. Come on, Rion, why not use defel on this guy to teach him a lesson? I'm all for games throwing roadblocks our way. Always throwing hurdles the player's way is a great way to keep them on their toes. I'm not a fan when we're given an objective and there's a straight line to the endpoint. Throw some hurdles our way. The System Shock, Bioshock, and Thief series are great at doing this. They do so in ways that add tension and keep us guessing. None of that is in Ash. It's padding for the sake of padding. And thank goodness for emulation, which I use for playing both titles. When it comes to emulation, I might make a few tweaks, like bumping up the resolution as I've done here, or use a widescreen patch. I may use the occasional save state for convenience sake, or to deal with tedious sections. That's about it. An emulation feature I made use of for Ash that I've used once in a Blue Moon prior is speeding the game up. With all the running back and forth between areas, why not? It's rare for anything interesting to happen between. Some areas may respawn enemies, but that's about it. Fetch quests are a great way to drag your game down and out. Look at the modern gaming landscape. As far as the eye can see, fetch quests run aplenty. That said, at least they have the courtesy to mostly remain as side content to bloat runtimes. With how Ash strips away at the survival horror formula, what you end up with is a critical path full of tedium with few moments of enjoyment between. So through that, let's go through the lows and the few highs of Ash. The soldiers here, led by Cass, do little to put a damper on Ash's invading forces. It's all up to Rion, despite Romero's constant bickering. If it weren't for us, this base would be toast in a heartbeat. In the hangar of the base, we'll face off against Pirano, One of the Galerians. I love his over-the-top teenage edginess.
I want to see the color of your blood. Yes! Let's cut him up and reconstruct him.
You put the implants into the soldier.
You too will be one of them soon. I'm gonna gouge your eyeballs out. And then I'll implant my circuits in your empty sockets.
This is a fun fight. There's one attack Piranha does here that we can either interrupt or roll to dodge. And that rolling window is tiny. Even after all my years of playing Souls titles, this attack can be tricky to avoid. Something notable about the boss fights in Ash is how spongy they are. Most of the fights feel like they could have cut their health down by a good quarter or so. By this point, you've gone through all their attack patterns. Time to wrap things up. Piranha, like Spider, leaves to fight another day. One notable difference in Ash is the voice acting. With the 6 in-game years between the prior game, Lily and Rion have new voice actors. For more of the Akira connection, the voice actor of Rion does the voice for Kaneda in the 2001 dub of Akira. There are several prominent voice actors in the gaming and anime dubbing space here, although in a way it feels like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Ash will have some long pauses between lines of dialogue, whereas in the first game, conversations had a fast, choppy rhythm. It's like they course-corrected a bit too much here.
A little while. You ought to get some rest, Rion.
You're right.
But somehow we managed to drive them back. Although
what?
We've used up nearly all of the ammunition here.
After going through that excessive fetch quest I brought up earlier, we make it to the ship to take us to Ash's uranium base. We'll meet Pat, hacker and pilot extraordinaire, to take us there. The pilot support character. They can add so much to a game's charm. While Pat is no Malik, Jock, or Joker, and doesn't have a ton of screen time, his cheerful attitude is welcome.
Yep, I'm Pat, the Army's best hacker and student pilot.
Student pilot?
Don't worry, everything's cool. No sweat, dude. The Beagle runs completely on autopilot, you see? Just the way a roller coaster does.
Despite the base being full of uranium, Galerians have an immunity to it. Well, to an extent. There's a bar underneath the map that shows the current levels of radiation. The higher the levels, the faster our AP meter will fill up. Uranium base is the game's best area, although that isn't saying much. It's more in line with classic survival horror setup with shortcuts looping back to earlier stretches. That said, the progression of unlocking these shortcuts is a pain. We'll find locked doors with a corresponding planet associated to it. We need to find a blank key to rewrite the code to open the corresponding door. Finding that blank key is a pain in of itself. It does little to stand out from the environment. I had to look up a guide after wandering around for some time. Again, this is where having the scanning ability would have done wonders. With the key, we'll find a terminal, rearrange the letters to spell out the planet, and use on the corresponding door. From there, we'll find another terminal, rewrite that key with another planet, and open the door. Rinse and repeat until we've unlocked them all. It's more manageable than the main base, but the backtracking rears its ugly head once again. And while a better area, it does still suffer from boring, dull corridors and rooms. Then again, it is a uranium base. We'll come face to face with Ash in the waste uranium storage. Everything about his appearance and mannerisms screams early 2000s edge.
They're such sickening hypocrites. But as for me, I simply can't live without this.
In our fight against Ash, he's only playing with us. After dealing out a certain amount of damage, he'll stop toying around and end the fight. He has quite the parting words and gesture of affection, if you could call it that, for Rion.
And do you know why? Because you're full of useless garbage.
Useless garbage?
Someday you'll understand.
Ash mentions he's off to resurrect Dorothy, so we're heading back to where we began the game. Lilia reinserts us back into the family program to find him. I was expecting Romero here to be an all in Rion's face about what happened, like a cutscene of non-stop barrage of insults. But no, an unvoiced line telling him, "Told you so," is what we get. After acquiring data for Lilia to analyze, we'll have a fight with another Galerian, Nitro. She does take after her mother with that outfit of hers with regard to nipple visibility. Quite the hairstyle choice with the forward-facing ponytail.
I didn't ask for an explanation, Rion. Imagination, hope, future, all so boring. How can such simple things be so hard to understand? If you don't like the future, my friend, then you can die now.
Unless I missed an easy tactic to take her down, this fight takes a long time. If you find the right distance, you could bait a certain attack that allows for easy hits. But she has this one fire snake attack that always seems to throw me for a loop. One that could eat through your health like no tomorrow. Something you could stand still, it will miss altogether. Sometimes I could dodge it, but I could never work out its pattern. It's a baffling attack, one that ended the fight many a time. But hey, at least the music is as great as ever. And like the other Galerians, she lives to fight another day. Before we return to the real world, we have some more pointless backtracking. Our access rights to use the lift back up have been revoked. So we return to the room where we first began the game. Here we scan Kane's retina ID. Kane was Rion's brother that we fought at the end of the first game, and we use that to leave. Something that adds only a couple minutes of backtracking. Like, what was the point? Then again, that's the name of the game for Galerians Ash. The main base is once again under attack, so it's up to Rion to put an end to it once again, because these soldiers are useless. Lilia asks us to boot up a reserve computer on the base's first floor to help analyze the data. Uh-oh, you know what that means. For this fetch quest, we have to find the startup key for this computer. We can find a system log in the same room as the computer to find who had it last. The log says a pilot was the last one to use it. Must have been Pat, right? You know, the pilot that took us to the uranium base? No, it's another pilot. I wander around the base, talk to NPCs, and I come across one who said he had lifted in the cockpit. Go down to the hangar and grab the damn key. Again, if this were like the first Galerians, we could have scanned, seen the location, and made our way down there. Instead, we got your precious keys in another castle means of leading us around. Piranha returns for a rematch. One that maybe added one new attack pattern? I think it did. Else this is the same fight as before. What a bummer. When you have a rematch with a boss, you want to throw something new our way. Give us something to work with. And afterwards, Ash is not too happy with the performance of Piranha.
Cowardly scum like you has no right to even exist.
With the backup computer up and running, Lily is able to obtain more data to help unlock other areas within the Mushroom Tower, so we head back once again. In Dorothy's sections we get one of the game's few puzzles, and it's a frustrating one. No one figuring it out, but its execution. Par on course for the game. We need to line up the first floor with the corresponding upper floor by rotating the rooms. There are 3 rooms that we can rotate. Each room rotates by a different amount. A common puzzle we see in many games. Nothing wrong with that. The issue is the room placement. Once again, Ash gets in its own way by making spaces far larger than they need to be. It's not a case where there are several rooms between each of these rotating ones. There's one circular room that connects them together, but that room is huge in its space. One you could chop down half with no loss. Yes, we do have a boss fight here, but even then it's more than enough for its size. To line up the right room with the right upper area you need to access, you'll need to jump back and forth between these rooms to change them. As mentioned earlier, I used the emulation speed up feature here several times throughout. This was one of them. Really helped cut down the excess tedium thrown our way. I feel sorry for those who played this back in the day without that option. We'll have a rematch with Spider, this time to the death. At least he adds in a couple more attack patterns and is more aggressive than the first time around. A much better rematch than the prior fight. Plus, I did feel bad for him in his dying words. Like the prior game, we get glimpses of their tragic backstory, being pushed to do acts against their will.
Leo, I hope someday you'll find a real forest to live in.
Once again, the game throws another useless backtracking bit that takes only a handful of minutes, but feels way longer. Spider drops a key we need to inverse. We need to do so back in the room where we began the game. Why? Because we need to pad out that runtime once again. Are you seeing a pattern here? Once again returning to the main base, surprise surprise, it's under attack. To note, this has always been a bit of a mild inconvenience. A few enemies scattered throughout the first and second floor. Then again, seeing how these soldiers perform, it's not like they have much of a chance. It's always up to us. Although for whatever reason, Romero is now cool with us. What's with this change of heart?
Rion, I doubted your strength. I'm sorry. Thank you for everything you've done for us.
With you here, we'll easily destroy Ash.
Rion Steiner, we're all depending on you. Every one of us.
And it wouldn't be a stretch at the base without yet another fetch quest. Cass sends us to gather more ammo from the armory. Wouldn't it be easier for Rion to deal with them himself, like he has done so before? So we head down to the armory to grab this ammo for Cass. Oh sorry Rion, we're going to need more ammo than that. Why not tell us how much ammo you're looking for? So now we head down to the hangar to grab some more. Although once we return to the upper floors, all these soldiers are gone. This results in a bit of an eerie feeling in the air, something the game has been lacking. Heading to the armory, we get a vision of what happened. Cass decides to sacrifice herself to save her troops. It's not like she's dealing with a ton of enemies. At this point, Rion could take them out with one shot of red. So this whole fetch quest? Completely pointless. Even more so than the other fetch quests in Ash. Rion thinks it was only a nightmare vision, but Lilia thinks otherwise. Or at least what Rion thinks is Lilia.
Maybe your nightmare was real, and this isn't. Have you never considered that notion?
This isn't real. What do you mean, Lilia?
Who can say if something's a dream, or if it's real?
Lilia.
You're a true idiot, Rion.
You're Nitro!
It took you long enough.
This rematch consists of no new moves from Nitro, or at least I didn't trigger them. That damn fire snake attack is annoying as always. But dig the environment we're fighting in. This makes up for the lack of new attack patterns. The aftermath of this fight is one of the game's better moments. Despite her weakened state, Nitro continues to trick Rion and the player.
I've been Lilia from the very start. It was me who saved you from the family program.
What a beautiful face. You still don't know what to believe, do you? I've wanted to see the despair on your face.
Damn.
The world, after I die, it would be nice if it was real. You've been tricked. It's me, Lilia.
Once again, we're back to the family program to gather more data. After more shenanigans involving the rotation of floors and rooms, we learn about Ash's backstory. His creation was for the sole purpose to destroy humans and resurrect Dorothy should she fail. Ash isn't human, but simply data. When we gather data here, Lilia will give us the password to access it. I love how basic, yet fitting the passwords are for them.
It's H-A-T-E. Last Galerian Program 8 access my mother's computer door. In order to gain access on the main
H-A-T-E.
And while we're off in Dorothy Land, enemies invade the base once again. Lilia's gone. Ash mentioned that there was a traitor within the base. It wasn't Pat, our loyal pilot, was it? Nope. Cass is dead. Who else could it be? Gee, could it be Romero? The one who had it out for us most of the time? One that had a change of heart that felt out of the blue? Like he made a deal with someone? Surprise, surprise, Romero is the traitor. The base is now destroyed beyond recognition. Not only the bottom floors, but the top ones. A place that was once safe, but now isn't, is one of those gaming tropes I never get tired of. Too bad Ash doesn't do much with it. Romero has captured Lilia. He's taken her to Ash at the uranium base. With Pat, we make a second trip as we enter the game's end stretch.
What you see here is only a reflection of Rion. But through this reflection, I've met you and Cass, and I've seen Lilia again. For that, I am grateful.
Rion.
I will finish everything here. That's all I need.
We'll pursue Romero from room to room. Instead of him heading straight down to the uranium storage, Romero takes a roundabout way to pad the stretch out. There are a few cases of cutscene incompetence during this pursuit, like Rion running full speed into mines placed by Romero. I get what they're going for here. This is a chance to stock up on items by farming the rooms Romero leads us through. Why not have the classic, there's no turning back after this message instead? Let us know we're at the point of no return if we progress forward. Let us go on our own to stock up. Don't lead us around like cattle. Romero, ever the coward, betrayed us in exchange for Ash, promising to spare him. We put an end to him with a pretty easy fight. His guns and grenades are no match for us. While Rion can handle the uranium, Lilia cannot. She seems to be on her dying breaths and professes her love for Rion in a tender moment.
Rion, I am Lilia, no one else. I am the Lilia that loves you. Do you believe me, Rion?
Yes, I do.
I thought I would never see you again. I'm so happy that you're beside me now.
Turns out she still has some life in her left. At long last, we can now deal with Ash, our final challenge. To fight Ash, Rion leaves his body behind. There's no way back from here.
I've seen too much suffering. Birdman, Reinhardt, Rita, and Kine, all dead. And that suffering gave birth to you, and Pirano, and Spider, and Nitro. That's why. I want to sever these endless chains of suffering.
Unlike the other rematches, which saw little to no difference, Ash has several new tricks up his sleeve. He's no longer only toying with us. And that backdrop? Perfect for a final boss encounter. You know this is it. For his final form, Ash tells Rion he can predict our every move before we make it. Should I plug my controller into the second slot? Well, no. I was ready for him to dodge our attacks, but there's a little difference here. He floats up and down, but he makes no effort to dodge our attacks. Although he is relentless, adding even more moves to his arsenal. If only the other rematches were like this fight. They didn't need to go all out. This is the final boss after all. But building upon past fights does wonders. If done right, the boss rematch can be some of the game's best, most memorable moments. While I have plenty of issues with Galerians Ash, this final fight against Ash isn't one of them. It ends the game on a high note. This time, Rion returns a gesture of quote-unquote affection to Ash with the kiss of death.
You were created to destroy her. I think I know now why I couldn't hate you from my heart. Goodbye, Ash.
A post-credit scene shows our pilot pal Pat coming to find Rion with the data left behind. It's been 10 years since Rion's fight with Ash. Mankind has advanced in technology to the point it's eliminated dangerous programs like Dorothy. Lilia's last wish was to find Rion within the data left behind to return him to the real world, like before. She died after 2 years of dealing with radiation sickness. Pat put those hacking skills of his to good use to continue her work. Rion declines. He tells Pat to wipe away any remaining data of Ash and himself. Final death, which Pat grants. Rion's story is over, and the Galerian series as a whole.
Lilia, I always hear your voice.
I couldn't find any information if there were any plans for a third title. You could continue on with Pat, but Galerians always felt like Rion's story. A bittersweet yet fitting ending. Although I wish Lilia had a better send-off. To die off screen after a couple of years of radiation poisoning? That's brutal. They could have had her, with her remaining strength, help Rion in some way of defeating Ash. Something that would have given her death more meaning and weight. Too bad that wasn't the case. And so ends the Galerian series. One very much of its time frame of the late 90s and early 2000s. One title that took the Resident Evil formula and ran with it to make a unique experience that stands out from its contemporaries. And a sequel caught in a generational leap that lost most of what made the original work. First game is well worth checking out. Beyond emulation or finding a disc copy, there was never a port to later consoles or a remaster. And on that note, I better not see any comments below saying this game needs a remake. It's fine as is. It's a game of its time, and like 99% of remakes, totally unnecessary. If any game developers want to use Galerians as a template, by all means. There's a challenge for all you indie developers out there. If you are curious and feel like torturing yourself, you can check out the sequel. Well, torture's a bit strong, but it's a mediocre experience with a few decent moments sprinkled throughout. Just like life. That feels like something Rion would say with all that teenage angst of his. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel further, do consider becoming a patron or a YouTube member. You'll get access to videos earlier, you'll be featured in the credits, and you'll get periodic updates.